So, let's get to second VOD review of the night. We're going LCK, so 7:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. This was, of course, the third game of the first series of LCK until the schedule changed this year. So, hoping to catch some LCK fans. Order is thankfully being thrown up by the Streamlabs bot. We finished Team Liquid vs FlyQuest. If you missed that one, you can go into the live Twitch VOD. I will also be uploading it onto YouTube after the stream ends. And I try to get it in as fast as possible. So, because of that, we will definitely have the VOD up, I would say, about 7-8 hours from now. So apologies for people who really wanted to catch that, but there are ways to do so, and then I will clean it up and get it up later. So, LCK. So honestly, the big statement about this week is the fall of Griffin. They started the week last week with, what, 2 losses? Maybe it was 1 loss, and then from there have now lost, they lost 4 games this week, and the game last week. So it was 1 loss, and now they have 6 game losses and 2 match losses. And the question of why is one that a lot of people have asked. And is it hubris? Is it, is it that Griffin doesn't care? Is it, they're almost guaranteed to be first? Why is it? And that's a very fair question. I think there's a lot of different reasons it could be. But I try to focus on what is and what isn't. And then I'm there with you guys in conjecture, right? Because, someone in chat saying it could be trolling. It could be. I don't know. Even if I ask the players directly, they have no incentive to answer me directly on questions like that, or maybe they don't know, or they're too close to it, right? So at the end of the day, we have to do a bit of Sherlock Holmes, which is, as I've told you guys before, how I like to approach being a caster. I like to look at what I can see, infer based on my knowledge, and then I'm there with you on the conspiracy theories. It could be something crazy, but as we can tell, they lost to Gen.G 2-0. They lost to Afreeca Freecs 2-1. So they're having troubles. And what I think is important to discuss is that, they limped over the line against SKT. Could have been a loss. This was a more convincing victory over Sandbox, so I'm going to call this an anomaly for now. And then they lost to Gen.G, lost to Afreeca. Remember, the top 4 series you see here, the SKT through Afreeca Freecs series, are on 9-4 onwards. So with Urgot, I say disabled, nerfed, out of the meta, struggling. Urgot's not what he was before. And yet, they have played a lot of Urgot since then. In fact, we look at your boy Sword. You're looking at his scenario, and since the time that the changes have come in, still a lot of Urgot. He's trying to make the Rise work, trying to make the Null work. They're having struggles with top lane champion pool. And you might say, well, PapaSmithy, their top laner just plays Sion and Urgot and is fine. And that was true for a lot of all the wins at the bottom of this. The first round robin, that was true. But with Urgot's removal and Sion's nerf, Griffin haven't been able to draft how they want to draft. So how did Griffin draft? A very fair question. What Griffin wants to do in a normal draft. So we're going to go over game 1, game 2 of this series, and also go back, talk about the Gen.G series. We don't have pick order here, but basically what you need to understand is on the red side, Griffin wants to draft for mid jungle. The way Griffin win is that Tarzan gets a jungler, it's a counter pick, and then the mid laner gets a priority champion. Sometimes it's fallback Galio, but Chovy will take kind of priority mid laner, and by that I mean a mid laner that can push and roam first. And then they take over the enemy jungle, and it doesn't even need to be the wards of old. They've got the battle ward duo who just make the map impossible to go to places in. If, in a vacuum, you don't look on the left side, you look on the right side, you say Galio, Olaf. Kind of reminds you of Galio Kha'Zix, Galio Kindred. Olaf runs in, and we call him a tempo jungle. When you're ahead, man, is he punishing and can get in there and contest camps and does so much damage. And then Galio gives him hard CC behind us. You're like, all right, that sounds pretty good. But Afreeca Freecs are a team that can wield very, very aggressive jungle picks that other junglers in Korea don't play. Great example is Kindred. Dread is a Kindred god. Unbelievable Kindred play. I believe his 2018 season win rate was 73% on Kindred. It might have been 80%. It was insane win rate on Kindred. He is a Kindred first player. And yes, his scoreline for this game 1 doesn't inspire confidence, but what you need to understand is that mid jungle this game were able to counterpick the enemy. You would take Lissandra and Kindred, especially because Kindred just beats Olaf at most stages of the game, and then Lissandra back up there. And they also were able to do that because Griffin left their last pick for top. And this is not something they will consistently do. They will not value a sword pick. They last pick swords Riven into Aatrox, and he lost the matchup very hard. I was watching from home, LS was casting. It was very clear there were many trading issues around the lane, like the Q autos that we always expect with how the Q trades work with a Riven were not there. He's something he's been practicing in solo queue, and it's a champion pool he's been trying to work on. But the big takeaway here is that Griffin used last pick, which is your big advantage on red side, to give Sword a counter matchup that he lost. So that's already a problem because it was at the cost of other people getting the matchups they wanted. They weren't able to fully put pay to the sort of advantages that Dread can set up, and they just never were able to play around topside ever, mostly because it was Kindred plus an Aatrox who was winning really hard. And that's kind of the struggle that Griffin have right now is they were able for the longest time on blue or red side to first round Scion or Urgot and be fine. However, both those champions have many lanes they're exposed in, and it stops Sword from being I'll be able to initiate anyway player. It feels really bad to be a top lane tank player, and we're going to just group Urgot in the tank bucket, even though he was obviously overtuned for a long time, so he felt like a damage threat as well. If your top laner is an initiator who just wants to kind of go even in lane and then from there rotate, there is no blind pick left. None. The closest to a champion that kind of sets that up is Kennen, which I'm quite surprised that Sword isn't playing more. I think Kennen would fit his wheelhouse better. There is no Urgot Unsealed Spellbook first pick, worst as Aatrox 55-45 matchup. There's no Scion of he can get through everything and then roll through. Those champs are all gone. There's a skill matchup into all of those, and most LCK top laners are more comfortable these days on carries. So Keen is obviously a super carry player, so you can't play Jarvan into Keen. He will wreck you on a lot of different picks. Riven, Renekton. There's a lot of picks into Jarvan top. You think of other top laners that are tankish, that can initiate. He'll wreck all of those as well. You could try and run Gnar, and it is a champion they've played, but there is good Gnar matchups. You can even run Kennen into Gnar. Kennen's an old famous Gnar counterpick. So I think Gnar will be where he goes next. It's surprising he's only played a single game of Gnar, but when it comes to, I can always initiate because I'm Urgot or Scion. Remember, they don't need Gnar bar management or anything like that. They just ready to go. I'm going to Righteous Glory in, and Sword was always a Righteous Glory. Urgot Rush player. There's a Righteous Glory Scion as well, getting in there. He was never Iceborne Gauntlet Scion. It was always Righteous Glory Scion. It was, I can be fine in lane with a little bit of resources, because actually the jungler does go top to relieve pressure from time to time. If not, I'm going to be there on an island, and then I'm going to teleport. And that is a problem for Griffin right now, because around top lane, they're losing much more than they were before, because Urgot and Scion would always lose gracefully. And then Tarzan is kind of having to go top and be predictable at his pathing and not linking up with a counterpick mid laner and taking priority and making things happen. And that's really wrecking their game plan. And it's the sort of thing that I think could happen to Team Liquid as well. I think Impact's shown more on more carries. Top side, Sword has played Jace and looked fine on it. And I think if he could get Jace, he'd feel good about that. Because I think his Jace is like, tiers above zombie push. His Jace is fine. He can't get Jace, right? Because no one gets Jace anymore. It gets banned every game. In this game, I don't think he's comfortable on Nico. Amusingly, I looked at his up.gg, and he's playing a lot of Nico. So maybe 9.5 Nico will bail him out like it did Cuvée and go top side. But champion pool for top laners who traditionally have been abandoned is never been in a worse spot. I was actually talking to Riot Balance about this. Like, where do you lane your tank when top lane tanks get blasted? Mid lane tanks are gone. Bot lane tanks, supports are getting relic shield nerfs, and tank junglers have the most chance, but situationally can just fall too far behind, right? it's really hard to run tanks, and I think Griffin's trying to get something out of Sword that is different to what he got before. So the Riven game didn't work, got slammed. That was over. Tank engage. I'm being very reductive about language here. Calling Urgot as strictly as tank is obviously reductionary, but I'm sure you guys can understand what I'm saying. So game 1 was largely just that Riven was dead weight, like couldn't do anything, was so far behind, and they also, it means they have Riven in team fights instead of Urgot and Sion, so they had worse team fight tools. You take Aatrox in team fight over Riven almost every time. Game number 2, they were able to bring it back, so that was an important takeaway here. Really nice pop off from bot lane. I think Chovy going the Righteous Glory, Rylai's Rise is very interesting because he kind of fully embracing his Doinby routes here and just was able to kind of be a pick champion, and things just fell apart. This was a game where Jax was incredibly far ahead. Trinity Force super early on Keen. Sword actually even got the Urgot, which is much easier for teams to ban on blue side than it is on red side. Because if you're banning Urgot red side, it just feels so weird. And yet it got slammed by Keen because it showed you that you can't even win these matchups anymore. Like Urgot versus Jax is never great for Urgot, but the tipping point was later. Now the tipping point is earlier because your shield sucks, so you do get all in way harder. So they kind of, basically, we got a mess up in mid lane and bot lane, and then it was well profited on. And I do like the Doinby kind of full-on embrace of the Rise here, and bot lane went really well for Viper in the hands. So this was just kind of being bashed on the head with the tier list outside of top, and Griffin playing pretty well. They're not a bad team. My point when saying they were overrated was never Griffin are bad. It was Griffin have issues that I think will crop up and makes them overrated for international competition at the moment. And then we move to game number 3, which is where we come in. So just to think about draft things that have happened so far, Griffin will be back on the red side. They banned Kalista, Nico, and Jace. Jace ban required against Keen. Keen is our best Jace player. There's no bans that can ban Keen out. Like, they're always going to be stuck with top lane problems, and that's something that's already hit them on the head twice this series. They're now aware of the Kindred. That's something you can return to. Aiming's a very interesting player, so I don't think he'd necessarily throw bans there. Let's see how many of these bans get repeated, because we did see a Sion ban blue side. There wasn't an Urgot further ban in this series, but you could consider just banning it and wondering what they do, right? And you want to see stuff from Tarzan and Chovy. You think of Griffin Gen.G, just to finish off before we go to the current VOD, which is game 3 of Afreeca Gen.G. This is earlier the same week. Griffin's issue here is they're trying out Rise, because I think a lot of teams are loving first pick Rise around the world. I think it will only go up in priority because a lot of the mid lane matchups are pretty good. The top lane matchups are pretty good. It scales well, and it's a reliable CC. It may not be an initiating tool, but it is that Realm Warp can be situationally. Problem is, the Rise early to try to replace something like an Urgot, just easily answered by Nico Top, and Nico Top wins this matchup at most points. And this is where we criticize Griffin for Corki no frontline, not going to call Galio support and Nocturne a frontline, even Rise, where they just weren't able to play out fights and they got out-teamed for it. Back-to-back in this series on the second game, they stuck with the Rise, and they stuck with basically the same draft, and then this was a game that was much more about Griffin having a very obvious time to play and not actually going in early game. Like, this is where Griffin didn't find their timings. I didn't see it during the VOD review, but during the live game, but it was actually some creative fake dummy pathing from the laners of Gen.G and also their jungler to throw the scent off from Zinjar. That doesn't explain why Zinjar never got anything done, but this was a combination of kind of trying a new meta read of this Rise top lane for Sword and not working, and then around their jungle and mid not having the pressure. So I think Griffin need this champion goes top and is fine, and then the ability to counter pick mid jungle to reliably win series. They will win single games. They will beat worse teams more reliably than not without those things. But with those things, I think that's the only assurances when we get to the best of 5 stage. And I don't think they've been able to show it. So we zoom into our VOD review. All right. loading into finally our second series. So, game 3 of this series we just went over, if you're joining us late, some of the things that happened earlier. And now it's Griffin back on the good old red side. And we'll see what their approaches are. Blue side bans, you have to assume Sion or Urgot last ban. Even though both of them are lower tier, you know Sword is on really low confidence. And they choose not to ban it anyway, which to some degree is bold. But Viper blasted them on Kalista, and they feel like, okay, you can have your nerf top laner, and we'll leave that up. We're not going to deal with top lane winning. Because top lane, Viper on the hands don't usually dominate on normal 80 carry lanes. I think they're fine, but I think they're more farm up for late on 80 carries than people appreciate. It's only the Tarzan turret dive ganks he pulls off with a grouped wave. We saw it on blue side in game 2, if you go back and watch the VOD review. That really changes things there. So I don't think you want to give that kind of all-in opportunity around level 6 and previously of the Kalista. So again, it's a tier list ban over in Korea. Let's see what Griffin want to reveal on red side. Now, when you see Lissandra, you don't think Sword's going to play it. It doesn't feel like a Sword champion, and only this week had teams started playing it top side, so I wasn't thinking it would be a Sword champion, but Rascal's playing it. More top laners are playing it. You understand why they're starting to bring it up. And Lehens actually has no priority on the Thresh usually. So this shows you pick comp very early on the side of Griffin. This is their most banned champion before this series was Thresh, so them picking it up is kind of interesting. They just want to look for, they're fishing for counter picks. That's why you go Lissandra and Thresh in the first round, is you're fishing for counter picks in the draft where possible. And Afreeca are saying no counter picks allowed. We're going to go we're not going to show anything about our draft direction apart from it's not the longest range. It's probably going to have team fight. We have strong crowd control, so it's just a punishment draft on their side. So I think this part of this is Sun's champion pool. He's the new mid laner, as they're not preferring to use Yukal, and thankfully Brook's not in the lineup anymore. He's quite a famous Anivia Zoe player, but he doesn't really play that many other picks. He's always had a pretty small pool. I don't think he's that different to Fly. But Afreeca have, it's a pretty... They're bashing you on the head with what they're not doing, which is not showing it. It's going pure tank engage. The Galio has been pretty important in this series. I think they're trying to push up either a blind. So the interesting thing this does, which I want to discuss, is this approach from Afreeca where they blind take mid lane and say, yep, it's probably Lissandra, but we're Galio, we're not counter picking here. They take Lucian Braum, very powerful 2v2. It's now Griffin have to show one more thing. And why is this relevant? Asked Twitch chat. Griffin either need to show top lane or jungle. So either they're going to have mid-jungle counterpicked or very aware of the matchup they're opting into, which is something we mentioned was a win condition. Dread and Sun finding a 2v2 advantage over Chovy and Tarzan, the usual win condition of Griffin. Or they're blinding a top laner and Keen's going to get some amazing matchup to just smash Sword. So that's what this approach from Afreeca has done. I think a lot of teams don't want to pigeonhole Galio Braum into their roles, but Afreeca are saying at this point, show us one more pick, I dare you. That's what's happening here on this side. So I think given my read on Griffin's issues and also the way this series went, you just are so desperate to know what the next pick is. You don't even care what it is. You're so excited to know what Griffin will pick because I think Afreeca will have a plan around that. So that's the theory behind it. And they banned the Urgot here. So it's the first Urgot ban. They say, if you go Sion, it's a super no damage comp, and we're going to just beat Sion in lane with a carry. So that they're really putting them in a tricky spot here. Ryze is what I would imagine he would fall back on. I don't remember the exact pick ban of this game. And Ryze is the one that straddles the line, but there's a lot of things that can be run into Ryze. And he's a champion just like GP that can be ganked a lot. So Ryze is definitely not a solution here. And now Afreeca are in that weird spot where they don't see jungle. I think they were really thinking they would see jungle here, but I guess Griffin don't feel confident giving 5th pick to Sword after he got slammed on Riven. And now they pick an old KT special. KT loved to snowball through the early game, and it was always Pawn or Yukal on the Galio and Kha'Zix. That's a really strong invading duo here. That's pretty hard to match when you already have Lissandra. Like, to find an out duo here from behind, it's almost impossible. So the last pick is the the Akali for a split push advantage in the side lane. I think this is a really interesting matchup. I need to learn more about it. Because they're not saying Akali flex, they're saying Akali top. My instinct is that Akali one item onwards should have windows to kill Arise, especially if Kha'Zix and Galio show up. And remember, the Galio swooping in has to be actually respected at a higher level than usual because specifically they have Galio mid, not Galio support, right? So much more likely they're going to be able to hit the side lanes there. So I'm still unexplored on Akali. I feel like she's better than people think, but all the blind picks from the side of it's kind of the spots SKT is picking in has led to the win rate not being as high after the change. And they just fall back to Olaf because the pool here is awkward. So when you think of jungle champions to last pick, which is usually what Griffin want to do, it's almost always an AP jungle you'll remember because they usually have a tank top and an AP threat mid. And they're like, all right, Gragas, Eve, Elise. Eve, Elise is what you're kind of thinking of here. The Elise matchup is super swinging against Kha'Zix, the Eve matchup as well, but that's what you're thinking of when you think of a sword last pick. But then you're almost all magic damage, right? So you can't do it. So he actually kind of has to go for something that can fight early because scrapping advantage around Chovy and Tarzan is a main win condition for this team, especially in the meta with the way things are at now and the fact that you can't just be okay with blind top laners. But then what is it? Jarvan, you banned yourself. Like they get in a really tricky spot here. I think you think about something like Skarner, but then it's pretty low damage comp. You just have burst damage and then Viper having to find the right moment. Like there's no real great pick here. So you kind of end up with an Olaf pick where your nose is kind of scrunched like and you're definitely not hard winning the 2v2 unless you get a big information advantage. So after the Xinjiao loss, they're not playing Xinjiao again. That part's for sure. I wonder if I could have worked here. I think it's maybe too bold, right? I tried to get Peanut to play a Vi game on stream and said, no Vi. So I guess it's not in his champion pool right now. But yeah, interesting. There's a lot of EU's choices, like as Spawn is saying in the cast. Thank you for joining us, Spawn. You know, Lee Sin. A lot of stuff is pretty tricky when AP Olaf in the mid lane is gonna at least do Ace AP Galio in the mid lane is at least gonna threaten Olaf with damage, right? So I think in future weeks, I want to look at Tarzan's champion pool and see like more different AD threats. He mostly practices Rumble, Eve, Elise. He mostly practices those AP jungle picks, and I understand why, but if they're gonna get into more annoying situations like this, yeah, things are tricky for them. Griffin plays such an ordered style. Like a lot of people who are doing chin for Griffin, like they just see a team that was undefeated for so long, and they think about they just kind of ascribe how they do and don't play. But really, a lot of it was around mid jungle. Like Chovy, we had the stat up last time. He had until before the SKT series a 93% of the time he is ahead in CS at 15 minutes. Like that's where the synergy with Tarzan shines through, is that Tarzan's going to the right spot because he's generally a smart jungler and because he knows that he set up the dominoes to have a big lead through that area. See a pretty decent leash here. You never really want to give a leash against Olaf jungle because you don't want Olaf to know about your exact pathing, but you need Kha'Zix to be competitive and clear speed, so don't mind it. And Lucian Braum have a stronger level 1 than almost any other duo lane, so even if you give up level 2 lead to Thresh and Kai'Sa, you still always can press Q each and get a stun off and like get some cheese scenario to come out. So of the duo lanes that sound super risky to do that on, I don't think Lucian Braum is one of them. If you're wondering about Tarzan's pathing here, Tarzan takes Scuttle, gets the bad news that Raptor was taken. You don't take Raptors here as Kha'Zix without the leash. With the leash, was able to take Raptors. It surprises him. And this is very much a throw your axe a couple of times, Nunu style snowball gank in order to get double Scuttle. or to try to find him, because Tarzan really wants to be the tempo setter. Remember, he's playing Olaf, a champion who is very much about, oh, cool jungle of yours, I'm going to kill you if you farm your camps, or farm your camps faster than you. And he actually is going to be like super surprised to find out that he got power farmed on. This is a full clear outside of Krugs done by a Kha'Zix. Kha'Zix can't really do Krugs early game. And for people joining late, it's a Kha'Zix chosen second round on blue side in the 2-rounder picks, because there's no jungler that hard out skirmishes Kha'Zix in the early game that's in Tarzan's wheelhouse. That's why they chose it here. And I think this is some smart drafting from Nofe, who's had a lot of head scratches this year so far in draft. So Kha'Zix gets a full clear, doesn't lose a camp at all. He's level 4 bot lane. And the Trader Flash here perfectly suits Afreeca. And already, just like when Xinjiao could get nothing done against Zac jungle early in that second game of Griffin Gen.G, you're already like, huh, Tarzan kind of traded camps and maybe got an extra scuttle, but no more, right? And that's where you're like, a little bit concerned with how things played out. Gonna move to one. Playing out the lanes here. Again, Keen has been dominating Sword more often than not this series. Keen hasn't picked a dominant 1v1er into Rise this time. He's picked a Kali, which to me is about timings. Definitely drop damage, and Chovy comes in super early with his gank bot side. This is really nicely played. Let's watch how what led to this. So Olaf, I believe, spotted on Vision here, but it's just a really nice TP. It's TP from base after first reset from the Lissandra. Galio has TP up, but hasn't backed, and this is the kind of call, that adaptive call that Griffin can make when they're looking good. Look at the scenario they choose to teleport into. Sun is out of mana, has to back, and went for the greedy second back, i.e. letting Lissandra back first. Aiming has no mana, and they probably have a pretty good idea that Kha'Zix is, I don't know if they had a ward on it, but Kha'Zix is waiting for a respawn of camps, and even if Kha'Zix is there, you don't care because he's going to have 4 members, so it was actually really good gank timing coming through from Griffin. They come in from behind on Chovy. Really, really nicely done. Around bot lane in game 2 and 3 were the kind of the bright spots for Griffin this series, where they pulled off their now trademark freeze the minions turret dive. The duo lane bot lane in game number 2, and that got them big leads around bot lane. And now they pull off just a really nice TP gank coming through from the jungle. So from the top laner. So really nicely done from them. Trader kills here. I think they're just trying to do too many things around Scuttle respawn, so I'm not going to bother going over that one, but 1-for-1 is still probably fine. And now they have kills on their jungle and mid lane. So this is definitely shaping up better than the Kha'Zix Galio on paper was looking like on this one. This is just really nicely done by Griffin. Afreeca are too greedy on their recall timing mid and bot. Aiming has one more wave scenario, and that gets punished. And then Tarzan's kind of camping for Scuttle spawn, and then just a lot of stuff happens at once. They get there, and they start with a 4-person advantage, but then it just feels like Chovy kind of loses track of bot lane and dies. So I think 1-for-0 with their extra investment there should have been needed. So it's like definitely a slight trade down when they were really far ahead in terms of how the early game was looking, but not a game winning or game losing stuff on that side. And now we got level 6 on Sun. It's worth noting that Kha'Zix going camp for camp with Olaf is a surprise. That's what they've gained that you wouldn't expect in a game like this. So Griffin have got 3 kills, 2 more than you would have expected with how things played out. Afreeca have a competitive Kha'Zix, in spite of it being 2 kills to Olaf, 1 kill to Lissandra, and no interaction around. So things are going pretty decently, all things considered. A lot of this game to me is how Akali versus Ryze looks in the side lane, because otherwise you have 2 junglers way better from ahead than behind, 2 mid laners more about utility. Kai'Sa Evolution is sometimes a really hard outscale, but in a game like this, Viper will probably have to dart away from both threat and hard crowd control. Like either you're darting away from Sun's Taunt Flash or Kha'Zix and Akali are in your face. So, or even just you're trying to backline into a Galio Taunt. And so you can't just use Killer Instinct to subvert front-to-back team fights. So honestly, it feels like kind of the most reasonable Kai'Sa versus Lucian matchup where you're both trying to kill front lines. And Griffin's front line is conditional. It's the Arise, who might have Aftershock, but obviously he's not going to be building much armor until later in the game. Olaf, not really a frontliner. Decent, but more of a dive champion. Lyssandra's temporary frontliner. Lehens will blow up. So Lucian does have threat on the front line we're seeing here that he wouldn't have on, say, FlyQuest comp that we saw in the previous game. Observer actually pointed out that Aftershock was on cooldown. It's a good timing thing right there. And it's also a bit sad. Like, if you're a Rise on this play, I'm just going back to... Yeah, it's going to go back to this play. Like, I'm looking at the map state. He has no control top side. He's been put on an island on Rise, which is so much... Again, think about this play. The reason why I'm replaying is, think about this same play if he's playing Scion or Urgot. He probably dies 70% of the time. He gets a 1-for-1 like 30% of the time. He's pretty damn good at Urgot and Scion. But on Rise or GP or these other top laners that people are trying to blind, you die every time. The flash is so bad. Like, you watch the round warp already is like, I'll try and get out, but then, that's already, it's not much of an escape speed. It's not going very far. And then you follow the play. The flash is just bad. Like, that's down on your confidence third game. Like, my only job was not to die. Please, I don't want to die. Flash will get me to safety, but it was never going to work there. And now, Akali, who could snowball through bad lanes, let alone good lanes. We already said she probably had a timing lane. Yeah, again, if it's Scion or Urgot, which is what he would want to pick in previous patches in this area, you might escape. You probably die, but it takes way longer. With Rise, you're always going to die. It's kind of who's going to get the kill. And so now top lane is falling behind, and then one item power spike should be big for Akali, and she's going to get there pretty reliably. CS for CS, a melee champion versus a ranged. You're giving up on a Mountain Drake, but, I think it's acceptable losses here. And this is what teams have learned to do against Griffin is either you get your wins in an area you might not have expected, which is shutting down Tarzan Chovy champion pool, or you get your wins just from inflicting pain on Sword. But the pain on Sword can be done every game because he doesn't show any champions that replace the ones that didn't put Griffin into a draft hole before. So Tarzan's trying to clear topside, but this is what happens when Kha'Zix gets ahead, especially with Galio. Like, you can kill Olaf. Like, he's not tanky, and you can disengage his damage more reliably than most junglers because you can just use your ultimate to make sure he's not getting all those high attack speed autos off, and it does actually take out way more damage than you're thinking. If he's isolating himself, as you can tell, he's almost straight out of this. And here's another thing, and how often does Tarzan make this play? Like, we saw the bad flash before, right? Look at this from Tarzan. He's like, shit, I don't want to deal with this. Gets flashed on. I guess if you stasis slightly earlier, you don't get the execution damage from Akali, but you probably still die. There's a small chance there if you stasis the damage you get away, but it's still a low roll on the stasis, and it's a smart understanding of the camps that Olaf was likely to go to, what they had up and what they didn't, where their pressure was. Griffin had tried to fight back for this area with double control ward. Was that in vision? Let's find out. When did Olaf show himself topside? So he's pinged out on Krugs. That's how the play starts here. That's actually quite relevant. He's pinged out on Krugs, so they push up, invade, and double control ward from Griffin doesn't matter, and then they just push around where they're strong. Very, very smart ordered play. This is really good play calling around strength from Afreeca. The sort of thing that I thought they would be able to, but they weren't able to because they just had so many lineup problems before. Want to also point out that Dread is our first Kha'Zix in a while, and he's actually not going R-Evolve, like was the meta at the start of the season in a Kesper Cup. It's going Q-Evolve for Rift Herald power. That means this Rift Herald is way faster than you would think. When Rise puts over this ward, like, consider when the Rift Herald is started. Rift Herald started around 1047. When Rise puts his ward over, when he's like, actually, they might be doing Rift Herald around here, 10:47, remember that timer. If this is our evolve Kha'Zix, this Rift Herald at this point is at about 6,000 health, right? They put down this ward, and it takes 20 seconds to get it down, but this Rift Herald is still way higher when you don't have the isolation damage, so the isolation damage actually helps the speed here, and Griffin say, alright, we're going to come for the contest. This is actually a quirk of going for Q evolve over other evolves, is that given the scenario of Lissandra can roam up and has hard CC, Ryze doesn't have that far to walk, you think you have a lot more time to contest Rift Herald vision than you actually do in effect. This is actually Rift Herald's speed being buffed by the Q evolve, meaning that Chovy comes up and thinks he's going to get a 5,000 health Rift Herald fight, and he gets a dead Rift Herald. So this part was smart, knowing he was topside and finding the kill here. Tarzan a little bit sloppy around what happens. Sword is not, as you notice, Sion or Urgot, so he can't actually interrupt Akali at all. He puts down a half-second stun and no more. And Afreeca just making good proactive calls here that Griffin are getting punished for, that other teams just seemed incapable of doing previously. And guess what? We go back up topside, and at minimum we're getting teleports. At maximum we're getting lots of stuff. It's Ryze. He's got no health in the build, so you can keep just training him down is what you can do here. And Keen is feeling so good about where he's at. Yes, he's low on health. Yes, Akali doesn't have the same crazy sustain anymore, but he went fleet footwork. He's got some sustain. Griffin are trying to load in recalls. Like, they anticipate turret dives coming through here, but their timings are off against Galio, I would argue here. It's not perfect from Afreeca. I think they're a little bit too brazen. I mean, Sun's going to go down, but they get more turret plates onto Keen. Griffin this time are aware of the play. They're not too far behind, but there's costs, right? What is the cost of making this play? Because basically at this point, they're like, I'm 100% sure that that Rift Herald is going to be smacked down topside in the next minute. It's going to happen. That's going to happen. They want gold topside. They want to force Ryze into a long lane. So what are your options here? Well, if you notice, Thresh backs, Kai'Sa backs, they're already aware at this point that Rift Herald's coming topside, especially when Keen takes a turret shot to interrupt. But see what's required to make this play happen. Thresh has to back and go there. Olaf has to follow, so they're going through all of this. The teleport is to not allow the minions to do too much damage or too many autos from Afreeca to make this happen. But watch the play as it goes on, right? They got 2 members there, and they're able to get 2 kills, but some of that is answered by the plates, so already it's not a great gold trade. Instantly, Viper has to give up bot side, so that means turret plates for Lucian, who's pushing for second item, and will spike really hard at second item. So they're still overall losing out a lot in terms of some of the gold assignments here, because they're trying to salvage something on Ryze that's probably not going to be the most salvageable of situations. And then scenarios like this can happen where they can further chase, they get further summoners out. On a simple level, Griffin got probably a better trade than maybe other teams would have been able to in that scenario, and that they actually were there fast enough to get 2 kills for 1. But still the map opens up in a way that I don't think their champions line up around very well. Watch the replay. It's important that Dread gets. If 3 people die here, I think it's just categorically a Griffin win. But I think Afreeca need to make that Rift Herald play. They need to keep extending a gold lead on Keen over Ryze, because there's some item breakpoints where Ryze can actually stand and deliver, especially if he goes a tankier build. He can't answer this. So it's 8 turret plates, yes. But the turret plates are shared on Griffin and are shared in a more positive way on the side of Afreeca. I believe all of the 5 plates bot lane are shared, but only 2 ways. And specifically, the top lane plates, I believe at least one of them was solo gold to Keen. He definitely got shared gold on the other 2. Meanwhile, Griffin have 5 shared plates, and then plates on Chovy, which matter and don't, right? Like, you think about Lissandra this game, it's more about impacting with CC rather than actually killing people. There are some squishies. Like, I guess Kha'Zix can be one rotationed. Akali, I think, can disengage the damage decently. But like, they're definitely not getting Ryze in a position where you can fight, and it's Mercs versus Mercs, but much more importantly, Gunblade against not even finished Seraphs. So Akali's in a really good spot side lane. They'll want to continue to get wards around him, and the headaches are there that were there this entire series, that were there this entire weekend, with to some degree there against SKT for Griffin. Like, how can they make this game about what they have rather than minimizing the kind of scenarios that Griffin can continue to trade up? And that's kind of going to be an evolving question for them in this series. So again, this series was mostly picked as kind of a, let's understand what made Griffin strong and what's changed this week and what teams are discovering that makes them look more fallible, rather than just saying, well, they're trolling, which, again, still a possibility. More turrets going down. Lucian Braum doing their thing. And then just no eyes on Kha'Zix. Like, this is kind of a strange contest coming through from Griffin. They push up. Chovy just gets stunned at a weird spot and goes down. I've never been impressed with his Lissandra. I actually think Lissandra's been a pick that hasn't really fit them that well, and it almost felt like they were taking Lissandra because they were scared to show anything. So yeah, definitely not the Chovy that we've remembered. There's so much lower burden of execution. I love Chovy on execution champions, like specifically Aurelia. Like, he looks so great on that pick and other carries. But on Lissandra, I think it comes down to earth a lot more. So he tries to push up. You know, if that was a Aurelia fishing for a stun, you could get out. But as Lissandra, it's not going to happen. Some choices or some discussion and chat about Stormrazor Kai'Sa, which we saw in the LCS, which we saw from Viper in this game. I called it out the first cast I did because I had researched it quite a bit and talked to Viper about it, but I was under the impression that it needed to be with Fleet Footwork to get the energized effect, which, if you guys aren't aware, is 50 damage plus a slow on your first order. It has its own energized effect, so you do still get the damage and the slow. If you didn't get those, I think the build with Press the Attack is pretty bad. We're with Fleet Footwork here, just to confirm, but we saw it from other carries with Press the Attack, and we saw it from Piglet with Press the Attack. The fact that it got those buffs is so meaningful, and basically the argument from Kai'Sa players is, it builds well. I get AD and attack speed in lane before the 100 AD. With just 100 AD, I only had Q, and then I really didn't do much. I didn't have attack speed in order to like actually trade onto things. So they love the kind of like grab bag of attack speed, proc damage is slow, AD, and the faster 2-item spike, the 2 evolve spike, I should say. Like, because you can evolve it with Berserker Greaves, Recurve Bow, Pickaxe, and Stormrazor, people are liking it there. Now, the fleet synergy is clear, and I know that Viper has in solo queue and in this game used fleet. I'm just explaining why, even with Press the Attack, people are liking it, and they don't even necessarily build for the energized effect, which to me says the item's kind of I feel like the item's jumbled if you're not buying it as like a death cap of AD itemization. Like, I feel like it should be like, oh, I got these things, and Stormrazor fits it lovely as a 4th item. Like, it doesn't feel like it should be a rush item, but giving it 5% attack speed and AD, and with how Kai'Sa as a champion craves flat stats, it fits her build path. It gets her a 2-item spike. It feels better to a lot of players I've spoken to, even though you don't have the Q evolve as early, and you get 2 evolves earlier, which is a relevant power spike. And people are saying you just don't get to IE, Rageblade, Zeal item, with the game still being competitive. So that's the reason why we're seeing it. It's a very... Like, you want attack speed items. Like, you think of Phantom Dancer versus Zeal versus Rapid Fire Cannon versus Hurricane. Like, so Phantom Dancer versus Hurricane versus Rapid Fire Cannon. It felt like for the longest time, one was the best. And you just built that every time, right? Like, that was just the way it was. Shiv a long time ago, and then Rapid Fire Cannon for a very long time, and then Phantom Dancer if you need... what was a time where that was the choice. Now we're seeing it open up more, and I think that's a really good thing for the game, that there's not one item build that fits all. And so the fact that Kai'Sa's this weird champion who kind of always has a... Like, I think of Kai'Sa as the same as Akali. If you guys played when Akali pre-rework, and I mean pre-rework, i.e. her old passive, where you needed a certain rune page just to play her, because she wouldn't have her passives online unless you had a certain amount of flat AD and flat AP. Like, you were trolling if you didn't go that build. You know what I mean? You had to have those runes, otherwise don't play the champion. With Kai'Sa, it's like the soul of that again, where you kind of have to follow the earliest time to get the selfish stats, and every patch you have to look at how much attack speed and AD was upped and down on items, because it matters. Like, if you actually go Stormrazor into Pickaxe Recurve Bow and don't get Pickaxe, so don't get Doran's Blade, you don't evolve to level 12, which is too late. You have to go Doran's Blade for the matchup, which means you can't go Doran's Shield. So there's a lot of weird situations with Kai'Sa, particularly because she needs that number, right? Certain amount of bonus attack speed, certain amount of AD. Right now, these are where the numbers line up. It could change again in the future, but it's a field champion, and people are prizing to evolves early, and for pro play and how much it's decided at 18-20 minutes when you get those items, I don't hate it. So that's the aside there, because I know a lot of people have been wondering about it. This is really hard siege to pull off. Afreeca's siege sucks, but they know that Lissandra's out without teleport, so they get a chunk on mid lane turret, no more. If Keen wasn't spotted, maybe things could have gone better. But, yeah, it goes over the replay here, which is just... It looks too bold from Afreeca, and to some degree it is, but the reason why you see Afreeca still feeling pretty good is they still won across the map when they want to win. Like, they're feeling good about where they are right now. And Afreeca have actually been able to open up a gold lead through just the map plays they could make as that happened. So we zoom along. Again, this wasn't picked for explosive action, so it's much more about kind of a teaching time for why Griffin is starting to fall away and why I was skeptical, because they just don't have map control, right? Like, we're seeing super hard dives that to some degree are being punished a little bit, but we're seeing that because Griffin, the game isn't just Tarzan wants to play here, and that's where we go. So this is a nice punishment this time around. They're able to pick up a couple of kills, and we're not going to expect Afreeca to do things super cleanly, but the fact that it's Afreeca Freecs who come into this match with very few match wins, largely trading up more often than not when they're making super aggressive plays, lets you know that the playstyle innately is the right one. Like, if Afreeca can do these plays cleaner, they're just going to win harder. And they dive in here. It's a turret dive. Like, it's not like, don't try this at home is kind of the first thought you have about how Afreeca play out this game. But actually, the soul of this, do try at home. Because they're having to invest flashes and other things in order to get the catches. It's not improving their map state. Like, all they get from the map from that is, well, nobody was farming bot lane for a while, and we get some control ward on our red. They don't actually change anything else, and in fact, in the resets from here, Afreeca push up mid lane. Afreeca's still able to make it about them, even though they gave over 3 deaths. So, flawed Afreeca Freecs for sure, but what I want people to take away is, Griffin are a passive team in the early game, but they control the pace through mid-jungle. Now we're seeing Kindred and Kha'Zix and aggressive plays into them that teams wouldn't dare have done earlier in the season. And while they're sticking the landing on some of them, the fact that the chess pieces don't include Scion Urgot, the fact that they don't get the counter picks where they want them, is making things more wonky for Griffin than they would like. I think Griffin just wants it to be a very predictable game where they can just make the game about where Tarzan kind of herds the enemy. Because Tarzan as a jungler I think of as a bit of a herder, right? Like, alright, I'm powerful and my jungle and my mid's here, so I'm taking this camp. And then from that, he, knows the respawn timer, puts down the vision, knows which objective, where to play on the map around that. That's how Griffin have had ordered play, because bot lane's just farming and top lane's kind of losing. So it has to be around those two to make the big plays. We're also seeing Lehen's kind of around his duo way more than he wants to be. Like, Lehen's on Alistair has been kind of one of their other mid-game playmakers that's really gotten them some big leads. He's much more anchored this game on the Thresh, so hasn't been able to move around Kai'Sa, and the Lucian Braum is a reason for that. But yeah, we've hit mid-game. Viper has the evolve. He could actually sell Doran's Blade now. If you start Doran's Shield, you need level 12, but with Doran's Blade, it's as early as like level 7. Some people say, I think it's level 9. And Afreeca could just say, alright, we've got 2 items on our Akali. Okay, so action's about to start. So let's talk about the map state as this happens. So Afreeca are trying to make this about a Baron start. They want to threaten that. So Dread face checks, and that's just not the right decision, right? That's just very poor. Like, the reason why this is Dread making a mistake is, yes, he has Jelly backing him up, but he face checks first as super squishy Kha'Zix. Bot lane isn't crashing to the turret. In fact, his Akali is roaming up. He doesn't know where Thresh is at all. They have the deep vision. I imagine if Lissandra wasn't seen on minions already, she would have been seen on that control ward coming in, but this is Dread just thinking that he's stronger than he is. No view on Lehans, and Lehans is the one that guarantees that. If Lehans misses the hook, he gets out. He hits the hook and he dies, and they don't need to make plays like that because it spreads over to Jelly. So it's by no means a super clean play throughout this game for Afreeca. They turn on to Baron. They get the Baron, right? And this is a big win to Griffin. They were able to get a Baron in a situation where they were ahead on map control, kind of like FlyQuest was in our first series of the day. They get Baron. Afreeca made their match-losing mistake, right? 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 Really nice by Lehans. This play doesn't happen if Lehans misses the hook, because obviously you can leap away from the Olaf axe. But this play doesn't need to happen because they still have Akali in a side lane. They still have the ability to hit other lanes. And then it's just the Fiesta play. You know, the PapaSmithy sacks can be spammed in the chat around the Baron, because they just try to make it about something that it's not. But then what's the map state? So you got Baron. Hooray. We can make people come to us. We have Baron buff. And that's a pretty good feel for the side of Griffin. And now Lissandra can push out very happily. And you can't play 3 lanes against this draft is something that Griffin should know. Because the enemy team scraps super well. You don't have any idea where Kha'Zix is. Galio has a global. Teleport is up onto Keen. And Lucian Braum, right? They start with a stun. And from there you're able to back it up. So scrapping, like you can't play 1-3-1 like you want to with double mage with strong wave clear, or at least wave control from Arise. And credit to Dread. Again, Dread is super aggressive. Afreeca have not played Spirit for the longest time. From what I understood from speaking to people around their org, the plan wasn't to use Spirit. It was Dread to be their outright starter, but there's so many shot calling and lineup problems that he always looked like a symptom of the problem. And to some degree he still is, right? He's young, like he's not Spirit, right, when it comes to shot calling. But what I want you to know about Dread is he's innately super aggressive, and aggressive junglers is what Korea lacked in 2018. So Dread coming in, you know, Tarzan, On Fleek, like these are the sort of junglers who on their day can be aggressive, and Dread and On Fleek are very innately aggressive. That can punish LCK teams from just trying to play super duper safe styles. And that's why you get moments like this where Dread comes in, Chovy has to flash out. Chovy thinks he's fine, but because he has Baron buff, but it's still a very bold move to go up there. And then Keen can get in the back line. Turns out that he's still able to pick up kills here. Like, it's gone... This is going surprisingly even. Like, Lehans is the only one who lives here. Sword only gets there right at the end. Yes, it's another trade down from Afreeca, but I think their innate plan of scrapping is the smart one. It ends up being too many. They over-index in this case. So by no means am I saying that it's the gold standard, but Sword doesn't actually TP in this play at all. Like, he comes in super, super late from this one. And you see a future fight where Akali can get full value. I'm a huge fan of the Akali buff. They managed to find a buff for Akali that makes her competitively situational without just making her the cornerstone of the meta. The removal of the heal and some of the other toning down, but the rebuff on the Shroud and making the Shroud its most interesting form. Like, Shroud should be for, can I walk past this or not in a team fight? It shouldn't be for sustain on energy. It shouldn't be for turret shots as much. Like, I feel like the zone control was epically buffed with the fact that you have to only exit once with the more movement speed you get, re-enter, and you get the full 3 seconds duration. It allows Akali to be like a cannon, because you aren't taking damage from an AoE, but for a similar circle, you're super scared of what the Shroud might represent. So I am a big fan of how they found a change there. So Griffin have a nice gold lead here. You know, they've been able to wrestle back control in this game, which in most games should be enough to get them back in. But we're loading in. We're seeing how this game resolves, and we're seeing how mistakes are forced out of Griffin, or if it's just a straight up mistake. That's the part that I'm unclear on from my first viewing. Big kill lead to Griffin. Still, don't feel great about this side lane scenarios. I think Merlin Omicron over Rylai's hurts how hard you can stick the side lane, but right now it's Akali versus Lissandra, and I think Akali just straight up wins that matchup in the side lane pretty hard. So Akali just farming. CS numbers, because of all the attempts to group and dying scenarios, like we're only seeing a CS lead in bot lane. It's actually a nice CS lead for Lissandra and Ryze. But Griffin don't have strong engage on this comp. Usually it's the Scion Speedway, it's Urgot Speedway even, but their engage on this comp is really only Lissandra. I guess Realm Warp could lead to things, so they would much rather play with the enemy coming to them around an objective, but they haven't actually been able to, after their wins, get down vision around things like Baron and Drake. So much more 50-50 at 30 minutes than I'm used to in Griffin games, that's for sure. Smarter here. Look, this time it's not Dread leading this phase. It's Jelly, unlike Team Liquid, who had Rakan on solo missions too much. We're seeing buddy system done, putting down vision the side of Afreeca. Just like the enemy, they're much better at finding quick picks with mobility and the enemy coming to them. And they're just trying to chase down long areas. So I like how they're approaching this, where they're trying to fish for picks. It's what their comp does. So you need to play towards that. And in the Fiesta Fracas, let's say, in the rotational play, they're able to find mid lane turret, able to take it down. Afreeca, man, they're so hard trying to make these play work. They made the right call to start it. So let's talk about this fight and why it happened. They go for this fight because Sword can't get there. Like, Sword has no way to get here. They're mostly zoning for mid lane turret, but then there's that weird spot where too much CC hits, and Dread says, alright, I got the combo, let's go for it. They get the kill onto Olaf, but they actually take so long getting one kill, and they forget they have no objective, that they dive in, and then they're all overextended. They get double flanked by Lissandra and Ryze. Afreeca Freecs. This is the team that beat Griffin in this game, remember. Like, it tells you that the theory behind what they're doing is much stronger than the actual innate way they're doing it, because they need a second time to ward properly, and then they just go all in on this, you know? Like, this is where you pause as the coach and say, what is the primary objective here, team? And there's no real clear answer on that one. Like, this is just bloodlust from Afreeca. It's people wanting kills they aren't going to get. People are saying spoiler. I know you guys are trolling, because the whole point here is to understand why Griffin lost, rather than the fact that Griffin lost. Because now, the goalie doesn't change, because again, lanes haven't been in a particularly great spot, and the objectives have never snowballed away from Afreeca. So goalie's still around the same 5,000 spot. And now map control. So map control is pretty good around top side, but it's like now super triangle as they go for Mountain Drake, which is something Afreeca were aware of. So starting to get control top side. It's not often that you have an Olaf game with Griffin where frequently, whenever the play is about to happen, Tarzan's behind the play. But he's had to be reactive on Olaf, which I think only ever works to a point. So they don't have control here. That part is clear. They're trying to engage hard on this mid lane play because I assume they have the timer that Hera's entrance is down, so backline is more susceptible than you might expect. Really technical fight here. I'm not going to replay it, but all you should know is it was about both Akali and Chovy zoning in the backline for as long as possible and keeping carries zoned out, and then everyone disengaging at perfect health. Really, really interesting to see how that all comes together. But then we drop from there and we appreciate that Lissandra ult is available, which is something pretty relevant. No other ults are available, and Afreeca still rush the Baron because they see Sword go bot lane. And they're looking for a teleport, I imagine. So Sword reveals himself, and it's a bold Baron, don't get me wrong. But Tarzan's flash is down, so he can't flash over the pit. He has to come through Sun, and his ultimate is down. So he's actually kind of not got the best options, and they lose the Baron here, which I think to some is a pretty big surprise. So let's talk about the scenario where they make this play. So this is a very interesting play. I'm going to slow it down a bit. So the play that happens here is that Lucian teleports in and Afreeca State lets start Baron. They know ults are down on the enemy team. Chovy, as it starts, doesn't have ult. Everyone else ult's on a pretty significant cooldown. So we move it up a little bit. So they just go straight on the Baron, and it's a risky play, but an assertive one. You know that Griffin want a full reset because they still have teleport onto Sword. You think he's running towards that minion wave bot side. You know that Olaf's ult and flash are down, so his ability to get in the pit is not fantastic. You have a Q evolve Kha'Zix, which got them the earlier Rift Herald, as we know. And with ults down, you fancy your chances clearly. So we're going to watch the replay on this one. Keen's ult should come back very, very shortly. They actually continue DPS on the Baron for quite a long time. So Sword very early understands, okay, I have to be there. Lissandra, who went for a recall, is going to be late. Tarzan can't flash over, which a lot of Olaf junglers were doing in the past, were sweeping the back of the pit and then flashing into the pit. Well, he doesn't have flash to do that. And because Lissandra and Ryze can never be there, it actually is a 3v5 for the start of it. So this ends up being a Baron take. Now, health bar wise, Jelly's out of it. Keen is super out of it. Like, surely it's going to be fine, right? But Lissandra, because she comes in late, having approached the pit late, dies. Keen escapes, and Sun gets taunt back up, and Galio taunt is a hell of a drug, let me tell you. So they're still able to trade pretty evenly and get a Baron after inting a couple of times. So I think this is pretty... I think it's actually really nicely done, all things considered, by Afreeca, making a pretty assertive call that I think at other times would have been seen by them as too risky. We like their approach, then they made mistakes, which they're not a great team. Like, they're still a team building, they're gonna make mistakes. We like the approach they took over the course of this full best of 3. Too wantonly aggressive in the mid game, but then they still at least, you know, they're kind of the boxer that takes their lumps, right? They definitely put in a short left jab and got floored a couple of times by a big right arm, but they at least bounced back up and tried again. And this is after this extended play happened where all tools were used. They run straight at Baron and say, Lissandra and Ryze can't be here in time. Let's get this one. We have good Baron damage. And they're right. Like, this is a bold call that I think other people don't make. But given where the game was going and the mistakes they'd already made, I think they were very much in danger of the game just moving away from them very quickly. So, interesting to see that assertive call was very, very big because it was the first good moment for them in about 10 minutes. And then, look, there's a lot of things they still don't have. They don't have great siege. They have some great lane assignments because I think Akali likes Lissandra and Ryze in the side lane. Galio's just, you know, an ult bot at this point. So around the Akali they can find a lot of leads. But actually closing the game from here is not easy. Like, the enemy team doesn't have the best wave clear, but it's enough when you're against an Afreeca comp like this. Loving the control ward line. As you guys know, not a fan of Corrupting Potion and Doran's Blades and things post 40 minutes. Post 30 minutes, I should say. And Afreeca are lucky and they don't have to make the game about pushing. They can make the game about Elder as well. So Elder spawning early this game actually hurts Griffin quite a lot because they have to theoretically fight against overlapping buffs. And there's still a lot of Baron buff left because the Baron was just claimed. So Afreeca can kite back. They know there's a lot of area that's not going to be warded. Someone's got a face check and Olaf is the only person up to that task. And this, of course, is the pretty standard tussle. Afreeca want to make it about Elder, so they can't afford to go and reset their side lanes, and Griffin want to push in the mid lane and then make Afreeca accountable for making this play. It's very much a to and fro. Let's watch the replay of this one already. This is the pivotal fight, as we know, so we're going to watch it a bit slower. So the fight begins, and you're going into a choke where Afreeca have vision. That is very important. They have vision behind where this is going to happen. If that's not there, the amount of autos and things you lose, and even just Akali's ability to choose targets is way harder. We extend the play anyway. At this point, 2,000 gold lead for Griffin. The comps, I think when it comes to 5v5, again, we've mentioned it, like the lack of frontline on both sides. I guess Afreeca have a frontline tank in the mid lane, but you know, Kha'Zix's job in these team fights is usually very unreliable. You mostly poke and wait for your moment. Akali pokes and waits for your moment. I would take Griffin more often in a team fight than not, because I think Ryze, Lissandra have clear goals, and Olaf can always at least zone out a threat. But it doesn't start in ARAM, or just in ARAM territory at all. Dread comes from behind, it can poke. So already Dread's going to have a role in the team fight, where some Kha'Zixes can do nothing in team fights like this. Griffin bait out an ult, and they think they can kite back and be fine, but then they find out the Viper's behind, that Dread's behind them, and that's where things get tricky. Because already, Viper's like, oh crap, that's behind me, and Lehens is not in, Lehens can't, I don't know if he's used it at this point, but he's not in position to actually use the Lantern to help Viper in this scenario. He dives in, and then I think he quickly understands that he's in a really weird spot when it comes to being able to disengage. So I want you to watch Viper in this fight, because Viper was first shut down in terms of movement by Kha'Zix, and then by Akali from the front line, because of course Akali dives in and there's no peeling her with how the Shroud works. And then you look at Griffin's side and you're like, well, they only have magic damage now, and Chovy's a burst mage and his burst rotation's down. Like, they lose this fight, right? And the answer is yes, because this is why I'm not a huge fan of Kai'Sa in a draft like this. Is if you were still snowballing and playing side lanes, you can do a lot of cool stuff, but they're forced to 5v5 in a spot where the enemy has some vision to start things off, and it really screws them over as the play starts. Kai'Sa has nowhere to go and dies, so that's a big one. Big victory here. And they can just chase down for further targets. See what Akali does when she's in meta, right? She can subvert things that Kennen struggles so much in those mirror scenarios to push through and win team fights. And Akali can as well. But I feel like Akali without a flank is better than Kennen without a flank. And that's an area where in team fighting there's an advantage, and Afreeca just straight up wins. So while this was not a super high quality game in any means, right? Like, Afreeca obviously super stoked to win it. You can see how things for Griffin were never in their control, and I don't think you need my VOD reviews to understand that for the longest time a lot of Griffin games were them just deciding everything for the enemy before the enemy even had a chance to think about it. Just really super controlled plays were what Griffin were all about, and those are just completely gone in this game specifically for Griffin. Like, it has to be in such a weird spot for them now, where we already talked a lot in the early build-up of the intro of this, of draft situations that are working against Griffin, and then just extending it to other areas where Griffin seem uncomfortable. Like, this feels like a Griffin you can beat if you're cocksure, if you're really sure of how to play your style. And maybe Afreeca were too cocksure in that, like, they were diving in and inting from time to time, but they made the calls they needed to, and they didn't wait their turn. And it's no longer the, it's no longer Oliver Twist with Griffin, because the please sir, can I have some more when it comes to punishment rather than any sort of gold, because Griffin was just choking you out of games. You can actually smash and grab Griffin now that they don't have the stable champions that guarantee they always win 25-minute fights, and that's my take on Griffin here. Again, I know you guys didn't necessarily get a lot of specific, like, awesome, like, rewind moments in this series, but I hope that you come away with an appreciation of just where Griffin's struggling a bit. And maybe next week we'll be able to shine the light on an LCK team that's doing well, like Kingzone, for example, or another team. Biased for Kingzone, wearing my Kingzone jersey here. But that'll conclude my VOD review of Griffin versus Afreeca Freecs, and just in general of Griffin in Week 8. Looking to see if they can bounce back from that with some new champions on Sword. Again, he's playing Nico in solo queue. So given that, we're going to wait and see if they can actually find something, because they need it desperately.